Hey guys, Eternize here. Today we're going to talk about a subject perhaps a little less sexy than, oh, here's this new plugin, or here's a tutorial on how to create this synth patch. But nonetheless, it's incredibly important for anybody dealing with audio exports / audio delivery. So the subject is how to export music to Mp3. Now, to spark your interest and to show how important this subject actually is, here's a comparison between two different Mp3 codecs when the encoding has happened 500 times. Now first, let's talk about why we would even concern ourselves with Mp3 and the different codecs. Well, most people today consume music in Mp3, and the whole reason why Mp3 exists comes down to file size. An Mp3 file is roughly 4 to 5 times less in file size than the equivalent uncompressed WAV file. Back in the day, that was especially important because that meant that instead of maxing out your Mp3 player with 100 songs, now it could carry 500 songs. That was a big deal. Now today, for me as a music producer, what's a big deal has more to do with what happens to my music when it's converted into an Mp3 file. Because the last thing I want to happen to my music is for it to change in any way or to degrade in quality. Having said that, we can't entirely avoid the degrading in quality because that's literally what happens in the conversion from WAV to Mp3, right? We exchange some quality for some file size. And this is exactly where we need to step in and care about the way that we export to Mp3, because not all Mp3 files are created equal. You see, Mp3 has different codecs. Codecs meaning the way it's encoded or converted into an Mp3 file. So most people don't even know this, but the reality is that these different codecs varies massively in sound quality. Now, I say massively. To the untrained ear, this is possibly not even perceived. But for someone who has dealt with music in many ways in many years, I can definitely hear the difference between the best and the worst codecs. And again, as a music producer, of course I want the highest possible quality out of my Mp3 conversion. And I'm sure you do too. So to show you the difference between two codecs, one being the best and one being the worst, I took the time and made an Mp3 conversion 500 times over. So we're talking taking an uncompressed original file, exporting that into an Mp3, and then dragging that Mp3 into a program and exporting that to Mp3 again. And then do that over and over 500 times. So what we're left with is the conversion effect amplified 500 times. And again, I did this for two different codecs to compare the difference between the best possible codecs and the worst possible codecs. So these are the two sets of 500 exports, the top one being the best codecs and the bottom one being the worst. I've included the exports in increments of 50 just to have a different point of comparison. So number one here is the very first Mp3 export coming from the original uncompressed file, 50 is the 50th, and so on. Now I'm going to play this track and then switch between the different qualities and the different increments, and then we're going to talk about the results and what it means after. So as you can hear, there's a clear difference between the two codecs. The best codecs clearly retained most of the dynamics and sonic qualities of the instruments. Now I want to zoom in on each of the codecs and compare the first with the last conversion, because this will give us an idea of what type of compression artifacts we can expect to introduce when using each of the codecs. Now for the best codecs, there isn't much to talk about because practically it introduces very little artifacts. As expected, right? It's the best there is, it's the gold standard. More interestingly though, let's talk about the worst codecs. It was very rough on the high frequencies, it didn't retain those very well. But even worse was the low frequencies. The lows were completely gone, which was a wild contrast in my opinion. Apart from that, the compression artifacts, right, the jittery digital noise, was just really pronounced with this one. Now guys, we have to remember that even though this effect is amplified 500 times, it still very much exists within the codecs. So it's also present in the very first export. It's just much less pronounced. Now that I've shown you the best possible outcome and the worst possible outcome, how do we actually get to the best result? Well, first off, the best encoder is called lame. It's the gold standard and I would say the best option in any situation since there's no penalty in file size using lame over any of the other codecs. And the worst one in our showcase here is the direct MP3 export out of Logic Pro X using the best possible setting. Now, Apple doesn't state what codecs it uses, but I suspect is a proprietary Apple codecs. So obviously I would never advise you to export MP3 directly from Logic because frankly it's just a very poor result. What you should do instead, and this is what you should do in any DAW, is export to uncompressed WAV file. Now with this uncompressed WAV file you drag it into a program that you know uses lame encoding. For me, I use Audacity because it's a simple program and they always stay up to date with the latest lame encoding. And then from Audacity, you choose the best MP3 settings and export from here. So again, I don't export to MP3 directly from my DAW, I export to an uncompressed WAV file and let the external program do the MP3 conversion. Now, you may ask, what if my DAW specifically states that it already uses lame encoding for MP3? For you, I'll say I would still manually export to WAV and then convert it myself. And there's multiple reasons for this. Firstly, you don't know about what in-between conversions your DAW might do before getting to the MP3. It might be that it's upregulating or downregulating bitrate or sample rate or any other technical aspect of your audio before getting to the MP3 conversion. And you don't want that because that could change the sound of the export, right? Secondly, let's say that you're exporting the track to be released and that people would be able to purchase either the WAV file or the MP3 file. If you export your project in two different instances, right? First you export the WAV and then you export the MP3 directly from your DAW, the two exports will not be identical. If you use soft synths in your project, which you very likely do, the two exports that you just did would sound slightly different. And the reason is that the oscillators inside of each of your soft synths has a random starting point, so the sound it produces is different with any given export. So to avoid any differences in sound between exports and to avoid any doubts related to the conversion directly from your DAW, simply just do it yourself. Just do the conversion yourself. And by the way guys, I came to this conclusion myself years back, not because anybody told me about this practice, but simply because I could hear the difference and because it just gives you the maximum amount of control. And this experiment really did confirm what difference in sound I've been hearing all these years. So do this, it's what I do, it's what the pros do, and you should too. Okay guys, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this little experiment. Let me know what you think of it. Are you already doing this, or did I just change your way of exporting? Like, comment, subscribe, much appreciated. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.